Okay, I'm Michael Henry Fasullo. You would asked about nicknames. In my age, there were fraternities in high school. In high school, I was 6'4". Our fraternity colors were green and white, so I was the Jolly Green Giant. And I played with a exhibition soccer league, and for some reason I got the name Hondo from the old John Wayne movie. And of course, whenever you're tall, somebody calls you Stretch.
Yes. Where did Michael come from? Who gave you the name Michael?
I'm named after my dad, who's named after his grandfather.
Okay, all right.
And Henry is my father's name, first name.
What's your current family situation, Mike? Where do you live and who are you living with there?
Well, right now we live in a little village on the North Shore called Oldfield. My wife and I have lived there for the last 24 years. We built the house ourselves. Well, we had the house built, and the guy who was building it went out of business and fled the country. So we finished building it ourselves. It's a solar design. We used to live in a small house of about 1,200 square feet. This one's closer to 3,000, and the heating and electric bills are half of what the small house was. So we have a lot of fun with it. It's interesting and enjoyable. I'm still working on it. I don't think we'll ever get it finished. We just put photovoltaics on the roof and generate about half of our electrical needs. It's a fun thing.
Did you ever know Frank Conti?
I know the name. I'm having trouble bringing anything forward with it.
Frank Conti was in charge of a certain part of the library in Brentwood at one point, taught there. But he lived in Oldfield many years ago, and that's when I was first introduced to Oldfield. But it's a beautiful area.
Most people don't know why the towns on the North Shore, these little pocket villages, exist. And the reason they exist is New York City stealing the beaches. New York City used to come in and it needed sand for contracting, and there was a sand pit, which is now called Pirates Cove, in Port Jeff Harbor, but they would come into all the beaches along the North Shore there and truck out sand or barge out sand to the city. And you will find these little villages with 400 people. There's Poquat, there's Head of the Harbor, there's Oldfield, and they were all created around between 1912 and 1930, and they would block their roads, say, no, you can't bring heavy equipment in here, and they stopped the sand from being taken away from the North Shore.
Do you have any children, Mike?
No.
Okay.
Actually, I have thousands, but none of my own.
Mr. Chips, yes.
You got it.
Yes. Do you have an extended family, Mike? You were the only child of your mother and father's union. Do you have, are there extended family members still around?
I have 3 cousins. One has disappeared to Florida. My cousins on my mother's side of the family, I managed to find one of them. They disappeared when I was in college. I found one of them, and she doesn't even know where her brother is. So that side of the family kind of just faded into the woodwork. On my dad's side, I have 3 cousins. One moved to Florida, and I haven't been in touch with him for a while. And the other 2 I'm very close to, along with their children. Wonderful children.
Where do they live?
All in the area.
All in the area. Okay.
They're in Astoria and Lindenhurst, and one's still in Brooklyn. We get together at least twice a year for on or about the holidays.
When were you born, Mike, and when were you born?
I was born September 12, 1945 in Mineola Hospital. And my parents had just bought a house in Hicksville. It was the last house in Hicksville. Everything between Hicksville and Roosevelt Field was potato fields. I remember as a kid, and to this day, I don't know, we've been out to eat a number of times, you'll notice I'll never eat chicken We raised chickens as a child. Chickens are the most disgusting. They're fowl, called fowl for a reason. But we grew, it was literally like living on a little mini farm. We had a piece of property that was 100 feet wide and 800 feet deep. And my dad's hobby was pruning and raising fruit trees. We had an apple tree with 11 types of apples on it. Of course, you can just split the branch and put it in from another tree. And we had, probably close to half an acre on the garden. And I used to sell vegetables, little kindergarten kid, to the people building Levittown over the back fence. So I grew up in Hicksville, never moved. They say people move every 3 years. Never moved. Most of my family were, my one uncle was vice president for Press Wireless, which the people today, they don't realize how big radio was. And if you go out on the east end of the island, they used to have antennas that were literally miles long. And Press Wireless was the one that would broadcast baseball games to Europe from the assistants. Another uncle was in finance. Another uncle didn't work at all. He just played the stock market. Got me interested. The family was fun. Every holiday was spent with family.
Did either your mother or your father complete their education? Because back then people tended...
Both my parents completed high school.
Ah.
But neither of them got to do what they wanted to do. My mother, strangely enough, was going to be a Spanish teacher. My dad was planning to be an accountant. My mom became stay-at-home mom, and my dad worked as a machinist for a company that was originally Press Wireless, and he never moved the building he worked in, but he worked for 20 different companies. They just kept selling the companies.
What was your mother's maiden name?
Miskovsky.
So she was not Italian?
No. My father is half Sicilian, half German. My mother was all Czechoslovakian. And the terrible thing, now that there's Czech and Slovak, I don't know what she was. My grandmother came from Europe. She came out of a nunnery. And my grandfather, who I just found out recently, was born in this country. My grandfather's parents, my great-grandparents, came over from Czechoslovakia. And my grandfather was a fascinating man. He was a steam fitter. And he was very large. Not overweight, just like a refrigerator. And he had these huge hands. And his other occupation was he played in an orchestra. He played like a dozen wind instruments. He was an amazing musician. And if you were to look at him, you would never assume that. My father's family, the two brothers, 4 of them got off the boat. 2 of them went to Mott Street. And if people don't know what Mott Street is, that's Little Italy. 2 of them, my grandfather and his brother, got on the train, went to the end of the line, which was Hicksville, and lived there. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was a cabinet maker. And his brother, whenever they build a ship in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, they have to have a model. And that's what my grandfather's brother did. And he would be given the models when they were far enough out of date that they didn't want to store them, and he had the most beautiful collection of model ships. That became one of my hobbies. I started building model ships. Wonderful, wonderful background. And all of the family, that's why I build things. There is nothing on a house I haven't built except bringing the electricity in from the street. Everyone in my family had a skill, and the kids all picked them up, so we all do our own work.
Sadly, all those models are gone now, right?
No, they're not.
Oh.
I guess they would be my second cousins now. still have them. There used to be Fasullo family reunions, and when it got over 600 people, it's all four brothers. Apparently they were quite prolific, and they would tell them apart by noses. Each brother had a unique nose, and you would just look at noses, and you would set to find which branch of the family it was. But it was fascinating. They weren't just chucked, and they weren't distributed
That's
amongst
terrific.
the children. They kept them together. He had about 20 of them. Some very interesting pieces.
I look forward to seeing a member of your family on Antiques Roadshow one day, just to
Don't
get...
be surprised. Don't be surprised.
Well, your mother never became the teacher that she had
Nope.
hoped to become. No.
Very involved in the schools.
But her son did.
Yep.
And were there any other educators in your family? Or were you the first?
My oldest cousin on my father's side was an art teacher.
You
And
also
my-
mentioned your uncle.
My uncle, not first uncle, I'm very bad once I get beyond cousins and uncles. My cousin's husband's brother is Mr. Munch, that we both know from Hicksville High School.
Yes.
So I don't know what the proper terminology for that
Okay,
is, but
yes.
that's where he came from.
Okay.
But I didn't know him until I had him as a teacher. I had never met him before. And Munch is not a common name. And since I had cousins named Munch, I asked him, and I found out eventually that was the link. No, I went into teaching because my father and grandfather started the first Boy Scout troop in Hicksville. And I love the Boy Scouts. My dad was in them until the day he passed on. And I started working for the Boy Scouts as riflery, archery, woods law, that type of thing. And I moved up while I was in college. I was what was called a staff training director for 4 weeks, which was training people to become members of the staff at Ontiora, which is up in Livingston Manor, New York. And it's teaching. It's the most hands-on teaching you would ever want to do, and I fell in love with it. And I was in high school. I was in the, I would say the advanced program. That sounds like, oh, you're smart. No, this was after Sputnik went up, and everybody had to be an engineer or a physicist or a mathematician. And they had this wonderful program. I completed all high school Regents science by the end of 9th grade. So all we took in high school was advanced math and advanced science. And I loved physics, and I was very dissatisfied with the way it was taught. And they called me down to guidance. You remember the old days of guidance? They told you things. You didn't ask. You saw them once a year when the test scores came back. He said, "Are you going to college?" I said, "Yes, I'm going to college." He says, "Have you applied?" I said, "No." I applied to one school, Stony Brook, because it's the only school that had a dual major in physics and chemistry. And fortunately, I got in. And from there, I went into, I'm a straight physics major, 6 credits short of a straight chemistry major, with the 18 ed credits piled on top.
Did you do both your undergraduate and graduate work at Stony Brook?
I did my undergraduate at Stony Brook, wanted to get a full degree in physics, so I went to Hofstra because they didn't have night school at Stony Brook. And then I came back to Stony Brook and got a second master's, Master's of Liberal Studies. You might remember that program, because it worked better with my educational background. And then the next degree was my administrative degrees.
Which you did in a number of places, I'll bet, right? Or did you do them
No.
all at Hofstra?
Not at Hofstra.
No.
LIU.
Oh, yeah.
LIU.
Okay. Okay.
Those were the old days where you got the job and then went and got the degree.
That's right. Yes. Yes. Mike, who were the, besides your mom and dad, and I didn't ask you if you remembered all of your grandparents and if you knew them and had a relationship with them, but I guess you've talked about that, and you did have a contact
Yes.
with them.
Absolutely.
But who besides mom and dad were influential in you becoming who you are today? Were there other adult influences?
Well, as I said, particularly my Uncle George, he was the one that worked for Press Wireless. And my Uncle Gay, which, interestingly enough, you see how things change over time, he was always my Uncle Gay until, about 1990, where he didn't want that name anymore. He became my Uncle Gaetano. He was a very interesting man. He built bowling alleys, but he always wanted to be a teacher. And he built bowling alleys. My other cousin on my father's side, the one that I found, she became a teacher. But all of my family on my father's side were amazingly, education was just, I was constantly surrounded by people who thought school was the be-all and end-all. I mean, school was it. You had to do well in school. You learned so much. At that time, and it's a shame when I talk to people today, at that time, you knew, whether it was true or not, you knew that if you worked hard, got that education, you would succeed. It wasn't true for everybody, but you didn't internally. You knew that was true, and you went out and you worked for it.
And you must have known early on then that college was going to be part of your future.
Yes. It was, there are things you never even talk about because they're just there. I was going to college. That was it. That was the other thing that was so nice. I got a full scholarship from the New York State Regents Scholarship Program because I went to a state school, so that cost nothing. I had a job at college and a job in the summer. I came out of college with $1,200 in the bank. I mean, today these poor kids are coming out $25,000, $40,000, $75,000 in the hole. I bought my first house 9 months after I was married.
Who then was the person that, if there was an individual who was singularly responsible, or if it was just a whole bunch of different things that converged, that led you to major in education to become a teacher?
Okay, you've hit one of my strong points, or one of the things that irritates me. I did not major in education. I was a physics major. I was a chemistry major. I have to this day felt that the vast majority of education courses are either so outdated as to be ludicrous or so useless as to be ludicrous. The best thing you get out of your education program is maybe some testing statistics and practice teaching if you get a good master teacher.
So I gather from your comeback that the formal college training to become a teacher that you received didn't exactly prepare you for Brentwood.
Go back, all right? Grew up in Hicksville. The minorities in my high school, we had some African American custodial staff who basically you never saw. I don't know how, but you basically didn't see them. And we did, in my class, have a true minority. He was Hawaiian. That was it. I then went to Stony Brook. Stony Brook at that time basically didn't even accept Suffolk County residents. We had, I'm sorry for the stereotype, but this is the way it worked out. We had a tall African-American guy who was the center of the basketball team, and we had one other kid who said he was African-American, but nobody believed him. Everybody was Italian.
I guess he didn't look African-American.
No, not at all. Not in the Vegas, but that's what he said he was. Everybody else was Queens, New York City, Nassau County, basically middle class. It was a white college. I would visit other colleges. Other colleges were white colleges. I didn't see a black college until I went to Selma. There weren't any. And interestingly enough, I never applied for a job in Brentwood. My fiance at the time, was student teaching in mathematics at Brentwood. And because when I describe my degree, I gather you can figure out that that wasn't a 120 credit degree, it was a 142 credit degree. And I had to do my student teaching in the summer, so I got in my car and I drove to Brentwood with an appointment to see if I could student teach there in the summer. And I met with Ruth Rosenthal and Harvey Brickman and Stan Yankowski. And they asked me all these questions, and we talked, and everything was fine. They said, fine. I'm walking out with Stan. And he said, we'll have the contract to you in the mail. And I said, contract? Do you need a contract to student teach? He said, oh, you can student teach here. Don't worry about this. This is your contract to work here in September. Never looked anywhere else.
So that was your interview?
That was my interview. I was working there 6 months before they got all my papers. They didn't have a transcript. They didn't have anything. Nothing. No recommendations. Nothing. I walked in off the street. I walked out with a contract.
Did they check your pulse at least?
Well, they asked me some interesting questions.
Like?
They actually wanted to see, strangely enough, usually you ask about dealing with students and things of that type. They were just interested if I knew science. So Ruth basically ran the interview, and Harvey had a little science background. And they just asked me, the key thing I remember doing is they wanted to see if I could explain relativity to them in terms that they could understand without a physics background. And that was the core of the interview. And I never left. I'm still there.
What do you mean you're still there, Mike?
Well, long story short, we had to do something called a superintendent's hearing. In summary, if you want to remove a kid from school for more than 5 days, they get a trial, which is called the superintendent's hearing. And I was in Central at the time, and I was assigned the job of doing superintendent's hearings. I didn't know anything about superintendent's hearings, so you go when you learn. And I went to a lot of workshops, law classes, things like that. And I started teaching how to do superintendent's hearings and teaching courses in education law. And since I retired, I literally go around to districts. This is a great way to become unemployed. I do hearings for them. But then they hire me to train their people to do hearings. And of course, once you train their people to do hearings, they don't hire you to do hearings anymore. And with the recent financial things, they're basically trying to limit them. So I'm still doing them at Brentwood, and every once in a while I'll get one here or there. Or a friend will call up and want me to do defense for their son or daughter.
Now, Mike, you began as a teacher, and in that regard, you were a member of the BTA once upon a time.
Oh, yeah.
Were you ever active?
Were I ever active? Well, I know you have to ask the question that way, but you know well. When I reached tenure, which is 3 years at the time, I was chief delegate of the building for the union. I was very active in the union. I moved from chief delegate to grievance chair, because apparently if you have a science background, you can put things in logical fashion in contracts and grievance work. Did grievance, then I did grievance and contracts, then I was a vice president, and then when I became an administrator, obviously I had to leave.
Yes, and that was my next question, because having become an administrator, you changed sides, and now you're a member of BIPSO as an organization.
Never was a member of BIPSO.
Is that a fact?
Never was a member of BIPSO. I was always what's called, it's a legal definition, it's called confidential managerial. Confidential managerial are forbidden to be members of a bargaining unit.
I see.
And to be confidential managerial, you have to negotiate contracts.
I wonder how many people know the difference there. That's the first for
Not
me.
many.
Mm.
Not many.
Mm.
Never wanted to be an administrator.
Mm.
Never wanted to be an administrator.
So after, when as you said, you became an administrator, how did your career steps go from the classroom?
I'll go back.
Until you retired.
All right, I was teaching physics and technology in man, which was an analytical thinking course. And you remember in the old days, the elementary shrunk and then the high school shrunk. Well, at the time we had 5 physics teachers. I was, with 17 years, the least senior. And I was told, you're not teaching physics anymore. You can become a remedial math teacher, or you can become an assistant principal and we'll give you a $5,000 raise. I didn't really want to teach remedial math, so I became an assistant principal. And they put me in charge of discipline for the junior class and all the special ed students. Very first day.
At that point, when you were administrator, you did not belong to BIPSO?
Nope.
Okay.
Because I used to do, you don't have that much time, so I'll make this very short. Guy DiPietro was a superintendent at the time. I used to do the numbers for all contracts for both sides. So, no, can't be, you're doing numbers. Very first day on the job, that's incorrect. The first day the students arrived. This lovely young lady looking like the parochial school poster child, the knee socks, the plaid pleated skirt, the white blouse, the suspenders, is brought into the front office and brought over to me, and they said, she's under the influence, at which point she threw up on my shoes. Delightful girl, just the sweetest girl, being sexually abused by her stepfather, which I couldn't prove until he started sexually abusing her brother. For a while, she was living in a shed, one of those tool sheds. Got very close to that family. Got the mom a job with friends of mine in New Jersey, and we moved the kids out to New Jersey, and they did wonderfully. But it was, when they would have the awards assembly at the end of the year, I'd always go, that's my kid, that's my kid, that's my kid, that's my kid. As an AP, I would go, who are these kids? I don't know who they are. All I dealt with was discipline. After being an educator, I did what I could. I did some good things, but so much of it was just so negative. I was going to quit. I didn't want to do this. This was not education as far as I was concerned. And at that point, this was 1984, Part 100 changed, which is everything about everything in the schools. All the graduation requirements, all the course offerings, community involvement became very big, and they needed somebody to change all the board policies, all the graduation requirements, all the course offerings. So they took me out of the AP position and moved me into Central as a coordinator of secondary planning. And that's how I moved into Central. That was in 1984. I moved into my office, and the second day I moved in, I moved out again because that was it Donna or Gloria that came through in 84? Whichever one, a tree went right through my office. I mean, literally, it was a tree went through. You remember Joan Lang, of course. It went from the outside of the building, through my window, through my office, through the wall, and into Joan's office. But, yeah, that's how I got my start. And then I became full-time with Les Black as negotiating contracts. And then we moved into the new central administration building. And the embarrassing thing is, if you ask me what year did this happen, what year, every time I turned around and they expanded my job, they gave me a new title. I kept doing all the same things, it's just until eventually I became the associate superintendent in the early 90s. And I stayed with that until I retired in February of 2002.
I'm tempted to ask this question, Mike, because you have an opinion, I'm sure. I see recently that the governor is attempting to negotiate down the salaries of superintendents and assistant superintendents throughout the state and cap them at a certain point. I don't know whether it will ever go anywhere.
No, both these superintendents are already capped, you know that.
No, I did not know that.
Oh yeah, they've been capped for They've been capped for 15 years.
They have. So then it's just a matter of time, I guess, before the other becomes a fait accompli.
With the 2% cap on taxes, I don't see how it cannot be.
Yeah.
The problem with it is it's not how much you're paid that, if you look at I'm sorry, I have certain prejudices. All right, let me just call them prejudices. I went through college and majored in physics with calculus and things and killed myself to get through. And it always used to bother me that I would look at my paycheck, and the particular individual who we both know but whose name I will not use was my high school gym teacher, who I thought very little of. And the first day I walked into Brentwood, when we started, the orientation the first day, there he is. He was working in Brentwood now. And he would go out and I'd watch them, and he'd throw out a ball. And he'd sit there. And so one of the things that always bothered me is all teachers get paid the same no matter what they do. All teachers get paid the same no matter how well they do it. And the only thing you get a raise for is credits. And believe me, I worked for the union for 17 years. I fought for this stuff. I know why it's there. But when you get to the point like Texas, the high school principal in most large Texas towns earn less than the high school football coach. So as long as the salaries, I was just looking at salaries the other day, I keep my hand in, and I was looking at Syosset, and doctorate 15 with 20 years is $132,000. That's a good salary. Superintendent, although not dealing directly with kids, is responsible for so much more. How do you put a cap on what they're worth? Plus, they have no job security. They get a 3-year contract, 5 at most. They can be bound. The average life expectancy of a superintendent is 3 years. Brentwood is very confusing because until recently, the first superintendent that was there passed away. The second superintendent was Guy DiPietro, passed away. The third superintendent was Frank Morrow. He was there easily 12 years before he retired. He didn't go into something else. He retired, then less, and then they went through the flip over superintendents. I don't know, let's say we had 1, 2, 3, we're on our 4th superintendent
Mike,
now.
the first superintendent that you mentioned or alluded to, was that Lou Nannini?
Yes, thank you.
Because I was not aware that he had passed away. We saw him not too long ago, so I don't know that he...
I was told he passed away when he left.
Oh, no.
No, he didn't.
He's in his 90s, and he's living out in
God
an
bless
assisted
him.
living facility, and we've had him as a guest.
Wonderful.
At R.O.B.S. He was like a rock star. Came into all these
Wow.
elder
See, when he left, I was under the impression he had passed away.
No?
I am absolutely positive Guy passed away.
Oh, yes.
That was a terrible
yes.
loss. What a great guy.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm wandering.
No, that's okay. And of course, we saw Les treated in what all of us thought was a rather shoddy way. And unfortunately for Brentwood, they lost him. But fortunately for Les, he is now landed on his feet and is in a very good position elsewhere.
A part-time superintendent. Doesn't get any better than that.
What was your first paying job, Mike?
My first paying job. The first job I got money for, or the first job I was on salary?
Oh, there's a difference.
Yes, there's a difference. When I was a kid, starting somewhere around 12, I would do I would paint my neighbor's house, not at 12.
You were an entrepreneur.
I would do lawn work, gardening work.
Yeah.
Started working in the summers full-time with the Boy Scouts when I was 15. Worked full-time summers until I got married at 21. In college, almost flunked out because of the jobs there. I got a job in the cafeteria as a dishwasher.
And that was salary.
I was salaried.
Okay.
And then they made me head dishwasher. And they said, you're doing a good job. How'd you like to be head waiter? But we still want you to be head dishwasher. So I had Mike Fasullo, the head dishwasher, and I got a check. There was Michael H. Fasullo, the head waiter, who got a check. They opened the next complex. They wanted me to be the head waiter there. Also, I got a third check for Michael H. Fasullo, Jr., and I spent so much time there, I went from Dean's List to almost probation, just because, but I made enough money in a semester and a half to pay for all my college. Then after that, I went to work in Brentwood, and then I used to have little side businesses.
Nobody ever told you you had to work, obviously. You were one of those people who were motivated to do it. And
Remember what I said before? There were certain things they were just there. Just there is, you had to work. Just there was, when you graduated, you didn't go home.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there was a difference there. The women could go home. The men didn't go home. If you went home, you were like a pariah. You were some strange type of person. Then I went to work in Brentwood, and I always used to have summer businesses.
Part-time work also, right?
Yeah, I would do part-time work during the year. I used to do paneling. Sheet goods paneling was very popular at once, and I had a business doing that. And then, as a physics major, I could tell you anything you want to know about a car, but if you opened the hood and said point to it, I couldn't. So I went and bought a $40 car and took it apart, put it back together, and I did a Volkswagen business for about 6-7 years. So always did something on the side as long as I was teaching.
Did you, throughout your life, have you had a favorite season of the year, Mike? Or has it changed over time?
It changes over time. When I became a skier, winter was my favorite season. And then after bending the body too many times and finding out that if I did it again, I'd have to give up kayaking and biking and golf, I gave up skiing. So winter is no longer I still love winter, but now spring and fall are my favorite seasons.
What do you do during the spring and fall that makes you enjoy them more?
What we're doing a lot of, I say we because it's my wife and I. My wife is very, very big with Sierra Club. Okay. And the goal of Sierra Club, although most people think that it's just an environmental thing, is to get people outside to appreciate what's there so they will support parks and things. So we lead bike trips, hiking trips, and kayaking trips. My favorite are kayaking trips. I love kayaking trips.
On the rivers of Long Island, for
Yes.
example?
One of the things we did is we went with a group. This was done through another organization, but we went up to, are you familiar with the Bay of Fundy?
Yes.
There's an island in the Bay of Fundy called Grand Manan, and we went for a week of kayaking in the Bay of Fundy, and that's a howl. Oh, that's a howl. Wonderful. We've been kayaking Lake Champlain, Lake George, Bay of Fundy. We take our trips out all around Long Island.
Long Island has no such tidal surge.
If you consider 4 feet of tidal surge, yeah. But Long Island's a lot of fun. It's lovely places to kayak.
Yes. Mike, of all of the jobs, of all the hats that you've worn during your time in Brentwood, was there a worst professional day? A memory that stands out as being, boy, that was one of the worst times that you can remember?
I think there's 2 answers to that. There's the 2 worst days while I was employed in Brentwood, which was the day Guy passed away, and I was working on September 9/11. So those were terrible days, but they're not really terrible associated with the worst professional day. I think the worst professional day I've ever had was when I was accused as part of a group, not, you specifically bad person, but as part of a group of being racially prejudiced. And really, really went nuts. I mean, that just infuriated me. Just to work there that long and have somebody say, you didn't give me this job, because I got used to it after a while, but the first time it happened, I don't know whether anyone has ever accused you of being a bigot, but I mean, I worked there my whole professional career. I've worked with these kids. I'm still in touch with kids of every manner and type you can think of. And somebody to say I didn't hire them. Now, we won all the cases. But the first time that happens to you, God, you just... It's like, it's just awful.
Mike, again, you said you came to Brentwood in the late 60s, I think you said.
1967.
1967.
Student taught there in the summer of 67 and then full-time September of 67.
Do you remember what you were paid that year?
I remember the huge raise I got. My original contract before I started working there was $5,800. But the contract went through. Well, it wasn't a contract at the time, it was a salary agreement. So I started at $6,300. Big bucks.
Big buck.
Actually, people say, the funny thing is, when you were first teaching, people said, you know all this stuff, why are you working here? You could earn real money. My first house, which was in the Three Village area, cost 3 years' salary. Take a starting teacher today, and you find them a house for 3 years' salary. You're not going to find it.
Not on Long Island, anyway.
Right. So, although people said I was highly underpaid for my education, I was fine. I bought a house. In 9 months of being married, I bought a house.
Mike, what were some of your first impressions of the Brentwood School District when you were here the first year? And who were some of the people that you worked with?
Well,
in the beginning,
the two main people that was Stan Yankowski, who was, I forget his official title at that time. I know the buildings had two principals, but I'm not yeah, he was principal at the time. And there was a physics teacher there, a guy named Lou Rabinowitz. Big mountain of a guy. He used to go through a case of diet soda a week. Brilliant. Just wonderful. I worked with kids. God, he was fantastic. He was fantastic. And Stan was my support. Stan prevented me from being taken over into Vietnam and shot. Stan worked very hard to keep me there during the draft. And I used to work very hard with the kids to keep them from being drafted, because you know who gets drafted. Poor people get drafted. Those were the two best ones. And then there were all kinds of wonderful there. Bill Nishu, I don't know whether you knew him, but he wound up working in Three Village Schools later on. Just Bill Mulledy, who was still in the area. John Lehman, these are all the physics guys. And then my college, people from my college, not close friends, but people I knew from college. Jeff Goldschmidt was a chemistry teacher. And just people,
Yes.
But the two, Lou Rabinowitz as a physics maven, and Stan. And they would, when I was in the union, I used to have horrible fights with Stan. Oh, just horrible fights. But the one thing I would always say about Stan never did anything for Stan. He thought it was the right thing for kids, no matter. Little funny story. The librarian comes up to me. She says, "He's taking books out of the library." Okay. Why? They're wrong. I said, "What's the latest one?" He says, "He went to the horticulture section, took this book out, and he won't return it." I said, "What's the book?" It says, "Fun with Pot." And I said, "I know why he took the book. I'll go get the book." And of course, the book was not about fun with pot. It was about fun planting things in pots. But he was such a good man. Such a good man. And then, of course, Guy. Guy DiPietro. Didn't work with him that much when I was in the union, but as a superintendent, what a great guy. What a great guy. And he would do things like, if he trusted you, that's all he needed to know. We were negotiating, and he made a math mistake. He always did his own math. He made a math mistake. And for a while, I didn't point it out to him. And finally, I said to him, we were outside having a smoke. Actually, we were in his office having a smoke. You could smoke there at that time. And I said, they'll probably kill me, but you made a $7,000 error. And from that point on, he stopped doing calculations. I would do the calculations for the district. 1 year, we negotiated a contract, the dollar part, and like that. He came in, he said, Mike, here are 9 plans. Cost them out. I cost them out, I gave them back to him. He said, okay, take these 6, pick one. And that was it. That was negotiation that year. And a few, the silly little things like overtime and stuff like that. But yeah.
Well, the brilliance that God brought to negotiating salary agreements by choosing to look at all of the districts around Brentwood to avoid the haggling every year was a stroke of genius that really built a rapprochement almost, or an atmosphere of give and take and acceptance between the union and the administration.
The other districts used to dislike us for that, big time, because they would say we were living off of their pain. And in a way, you can't say they're wrong.
By the same token, Mike, didn't they always come to Brentwood to learn what to do?
Yes.
Because we
used to give workshops.
Yes.
We used to give workshops. I always found it very interesting because my wife, for most of her career, worked at Three Village, which is the premier school district. And I worked in Brentwood, which, as long as I've been there, for people who aren't there, just always had this horrible. I was on a board at Stony Brook, and this was back in the very early 70s, and they were asking me, isn't it different for you working in a school that's almost all black students? I said, what are you talking about? They said, well, okay, you have some Hispanic students. I said, what are you talking about? I mean, at that time in the 60s, it was about 60% Caucasian, about 12% African American, and primarily Puerto Rican was the remaining population. And if you've done the history of Brentwood, you know Brentwood literally encouraged Puerto Ricans to move to Brentwood to expand the diversity of the community. Always had a bad reputation. I would look at what the teachers were getting in Three Village versus what we got teachers in Brentwood in terms of, forget the money, although we were paid a little bit better. They didn't get to pick out their textbooks. Brentwood got to pick out their textbooks. Curriculum was changed. You had to have teachers on the curriculum committee. I mean, teachers were contractually involved in Brentwood. And in Three Village, in the very beginning they were, and then they just got cut off. They have no real input anymore. It's a shame.
How did you define, never mind the job description, I mean, that spoke for itself where there was one, where one existed, but your own, because you are self-motivated right from your earliest days. You were entrepreneurial in what you did. And how did you define your purpose, Mike, in coming to work every day? Why were you there? Why'd you do that and not some other career that you might have pursued?
Well, originally teaching, it's terribly self-centered. I love doing it. I couldn't think of anything that was more enjoyable. I mean, I'd like to say some type of deep philosophical outside thing. I forget who said it. I think it may have been Mark Twain. If you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. I loved it. I mean, I got to meet the family. I would be invited to holiday celebrations at the home, and the kids would come home from college, and the parents would have me over to the house, and you could say things. Nobody was uptight. I had a student broke his leg, and I was going to home teach him in physics, and he was an Italian kid, and they said, we'll give you directions. I said, don't bother, you're Italian, this is April, turn on the Christmas lights. You didn't take them down, did you? And they'd laugh, and they turned on the Christmas lights. The Hispanic kids, I would have food I never had in my life. And they would have food they never had in their life. Were there kids that I had problems with? Yes. Were there kids that didn't get along, we didn't get along too well? Yes, but that didn't affect teaching. But it was wonderful.
Do you have any contact these days,
Of course.
Mike, with people that you did?
Of course.
Okay.
Almost every professional that I deal with is one of my kids. My motorcycle mechanic was one of my kids. I just got a call from one group.
Hold on. You're a motorcycle mechanic. You drive a motorcycle.
Not anymore,
Oh,
but up until
okay.
5 years ago I did.
You did? Okay.
You don't remember me coming to school on my motorcycle?
You just tweaked that memory. That's why I stopped you.
You
because,
weren't
yes,
there.
I do.
When I fell off it in the lot, I came in, it was so cold. I didn't realize it. When I tried to get off the bike, I couldn't, and it just went boom. Yeah, I just got a call there were a group of, they were in my tech and man class, and everything was writing. There were no tests. Everything was analysis and writing. And they used to work on it together, which I encouraged. It was not, you must do this by yourself. And this whole group of them were getting together for dinner, and they searched me down, just as you did, and we all went out to dinner together. Had a wonderful time. Went out to dinner a couple of weeks later while I was still here. Wonderful time. I still run into kids all the time.
Have you ever been afraid, Mike, going to work in Brentwood?
No.
Okay.
People used to ask me that. I go, why? I worked there, including as an assistant principal. I was in one altercation, which was holding young ladies. Oh, I'd rather deal with 10 guys than 2 girls. God. Harvey Brickman and I each had one, and it was. But I had a fight in my classroom. Once I said, will you stop that? That was it. That was the end of the fight. No.
What is
No.
it? What was it, or what is it even now, Mike, that pushes your buttons, that makes you angry? Because you're not an angry person.
Personally, accuse me of lying, and I'll go right through the roof. That is just a very personal thing. Mistreating people. Mistreating people makes me very, very angry. Very, very angry. And again, my favorite that you mentioned before, my worst professional day. I've gotten used to it, but accuse me of being prejudiced, and it just infuriates me.
You probably have answered this question already, but maybe coming at it from this angle now, after a string of other questions. Is there a single name that pops into consciousness when I ask you, who was the most helpful to you personally of the people that you knew?
Helpful to me personally in union and
In any way?
administration, it would be less black.
Okay.
In terms of education, it was Rabinowitz.
Okay. Now, you work, even continuing after your retirement, which was again in
February 2002.
2002. You work out of the administration building today when you do
Yes.
the service for the district. How many years total were you there, Mike?
In Central?
No, in public education.
Oh, well, 44 years.
44.
Continuing, using all the continuing things I'm doing. I worked until full-time, 36 years.
Okay.
35 years, I'm sorry.
35 years.
35 years.
Why did you retire? That says a pile full right there. That's
There were two reasons. The last job I had was associate superintendent, and one of my primary functions is to keep everything going with the state doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I knew that it was going to start all over again. And I was not, at that point in my career, that after having started in 1984, 1985 actually was when I started rebuilding all the policies, rebuilding all the courses, rebuilding everything. The idea of trying to make a new set of strange rules work was not appealing. And there were other changes, which I don't want to be specific on, which got me to the point that I said, I don't like what I see coming. I have a feeling if what happens is what I think will happen, I will probably be fired because I have a low ability to deal with things that are bad for people and kids. And if you start doing things for your own self-benefit and you're hurting the staff and you're hurting the kids, then I'm going to tell you that. And I'm going to tell you that in public. I'm going to tell you that in private. And I probably would have been eased out, shall we say?
Yes.
So rather than be in that position,
Handwriting on the wall kind of thing.
I said, I don't want to go that way. I'll go this way. I stayed around an extra 6 months to train some people. And I said, no, I don't want to be involved in this. I'll come. But what I do is I go back and help those who want help.
Yes.
Every time I go in there, they're still pulling things that I wrote 15, 20 years ago that I have to go back and explain to them, and what does this mean, and how does this work, or how do we count these sick, all these different things that I was responsible for. So that's fun too. Keeps your head in shape.
Speaking of fun, what was the most fun for you while you were active in a full-time capacity?
Teaching technology, and man, there's nothing better in the world. I loved that course. I wrote it. It was very interesting. The kids could get an honors science credit or college English credit, 3 credits. Remember Syracuse? Okay, Syracuse approved the course for their English program. And what you taught in terms of content is totally unimportant. It's teaching them to think. And again, as I started out and would say to the kids, I'm not here to teach you what to think. I don't really concerned whether you come out with the answer is green or purple. I'm concerned with your ability to think and use resources and use what you already know. You'd be surprised what you already know. I had, they always used to be concerned because I would do certain things, earth technologies, which with conservative people. And we had a very the student, kid was great. I never knew his family was very conservative and very religious. And he winds up in my tech and man class, and we start this unit, and he says, my father wants to come in. And I find out that his father is very, very, very active in the church and concerned about what's going on in schools. And I said, bring him in, come on in. And he came in, and with this class, I didn't do that much. I would get them started, I would lead, I would give them additional facts, and they would have done their research, and they would discuss, argue, analyze. And it went on for a full period. And that particular day, I don't think I actually functioned there as a leader or giving information for more than 10 minutes with all the kids. And it was pretty much out there. They were talking about surrogate mothers and artificial insemination. Wonderful. You got to know all this stuff. And in which state, if you're born by artificial insemination, do you have to be adopted to be able to inherit? There's all kinds of laws out there like that. They're bizarre. And the father comes up to me at the end, and I'm waiting. I said, well, we'll see. He goes, oh, I don't agree with so much they said, but it was wonderful. I am so glad my son is in your class. And I was just like,
Yes.
Because we weren't trying to, it was just teaching kids to think. I met one of my kids, he's CEO, CFO, I'm not sure which, of a company. He's using materials from this class to train employees. And the one guy, he went out and bought hardcovers of all the books I recommended. And I'm like, wow. That was the best I ever did.
Is there anything you would have done differently, Mike?
I am sure there are little things I would have done differently. Overall, I don't have something I look back and go, oh my God, what did I do? No, I'm quite happy with what I did.
So there's nothing that you were not able to finish because you ran out of time? No?
That's a different question.
Okay, yes it is.
In what I was doing, which was basically, except for the superintendent, everything in the district reported to my office, from buildings and grounds through building principals. I could have worked there until I was 160 and I would never finish everything. So it was not the type of job you could say, I'm done and now I'm going. No, it was you never knew what was going to happen on any given day. I mean, you had your projects and everything else, but there was always new stuff coming in, always surprises.
Carmela describes Brentwood as a MASH unit.
Yes, perfect. I had a friend of mine from college who was going to be an administrator. She says, I have to shadow a central office administrator for a day. I said, well, fine, sure, come on up. And I planned a hearing for her to see, and I had a whole day that she could see all these things. Everything got canceled. And she walked, and I said, I'm sorry, I'll walk you around, I'll show you some offices, we'll go to lunch. And then it started. We never got out to lunch. It just ran all day. We had a gun case. We had just calls from all over the place. What does this mean? This law just passed. What are we going to do? And she said, when she got back to her class and said, this is the things we did that day, they were like, wow, we got to watch them do a budget. It turned out just this bizarre day. It was wonderful.
What do you miss, Mike?
People. With all the problems and everything else, the best thing about Brentwood were people.
Yes.
They were the best people I've ever, were the people I wanted to see taken away by aliens? Yes. But the best people.
What don't you miss?
The political nonsense, which is not the terminology I usually use, but I just people fiddling and diddling to get on top of the heap and manipulate this and manipulate that. We're there to educate kids.
Is there something?
Period.
Is there something, Mike, that you would like to have accomplished but you couldn't?
Yeah. One of the things that I did, which is now becoming very popular, but I used to analyze teacher performance. And first of all, I wouldn't even talk to a teacher unless something bizarre happened for 3 years. Because any teacher can have a bad year, okay? And I would look at their grade distributions, pass-fail rates, blah, 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 all of that. And it's still there. The program I wrote is still there. It would give you this massive printout of every teacher, every section, every class with the full distribution. And then I'd have them run it, pull out all the kids with 10 absences, and run the same thing. And here's John Sherin. His failure rate looks terrible. Oh, nobody failed that attended. And one of the things when they bring it up today, I have no problem in rating teachers on their performance. The kid has to be there. And don't tell me the teacher is responsible for getting the kid there. If the kid is in the building, maybe. If the kid isn't even coming to school, how is that teacher supposed to get the kid there? That's the key thing. If the kids are there were, in all the years I was there, in all the years I get the data, I had 5 teachers that I called into my office. One of them was failing kids, I found out, because he graded homework as 60% of their grade. I said, your kids are all passing the New York State standard test. Don't you think it's unreasonable that you're failing them? And they're getting their credit because the state's giving them a regent's credit, but not your credit. All of a sudden it stopped. He said, never thought of that. Only one of them came in and said, oh, it's all their fault. Unfortunately, that person retired 2 years later. So, but we had wonderful staff. But that's, I would like to keep working on projects like that.
Mike, if there were three things, given, the proverbial magic wand, if there were three changes that you could bring to public education, and maybe public education in Brentwood, what would you like to see?
Wow.
If you had
three changes.
And you have complete, total power to change those.
Absolute power. I would like to see every kid must go to college eliminated. It's the most unrealistic set of expectations, and there are so many colleges that offer, and this time I'll use the language, bullshit programs. I've had people in my own family who graduate with a useless piece of paper. That would be number one. Get it back to, there are kids who have tremendous talents and we don't deal with them. All right? And with the new changes of No Child Left Behind and every kid has to pass all these tests, the artists, the painters, the sculptors, the auto mechanics, the electricians, the carpenters, the cabinet makers, the mechanical drawing people, all of these wonderful skills that are actually more employable today than half the people walking out with their public relations degree. That number one is that. Providing education for kids that meets kids' needs and prepares them for the real world, not this. Just one fact. Take all the education colleges in the United States, find who's heading the education college, and you will not find one person who's ever taught. Not one. Moving to smaller things, also equally important. I don't like the way education is funded. I will make a prediction here. We'll have it on recorded. The new 2% cap. Okay, what's going to happen is the have-not districts, Brentwood, all right, if 60% of your community vote for an expanded budget over 2%, it goes through. Is Brentwood going to have 60% of its voters turn out to vote for higher taxes over the cap? My guess, no. Is Hopog going to have 60% of its voters come out? Yes. Is Three Village? Yes. Is Roosevelt? No. Is CI? No. So X number of years down the road, somebody would realize that the poor communities, which on Long Island basically means the minority communities, are getting devastated, and the communities with money are still getting their wonderful education.
Yeah.
And other than that, this is the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
I do superintendent's hearings. What's the purpose of superintendent's hearings? I deal with kids who are not functioning and are selling drugs in school, bringing weapons to school, those type of things. There should be some way to better protect the kids who want an education from those who don't. And I'm not sure what that is yet.
Did you have a favorite year?
Did I have a favorite year? The first year I taught Tech and Man.
Okay.
That was my favorite year.
Yes.
And the first year I taught, that was a hoot.
Okay.
That was a hoot. I walked into Brentwood, and I told you my background. I mean, a Spanish-speaking person was Cisco, and what was his partner's name? Pancho. Hey, Cisco. Hey, Pancho. That was it. That was my exposure. Italian, yes. Italian-speaking people, yes. But Spanish-speaking people, that was it. Never saw them. African Americans, never saw them.
Yes.
Didn't exist.
Yes.
They were on TV.
Yes.
And I walked into Brentwood.
But not often.
No. I walked into Brentwood my first day, and you talk about, I really now understood what culture shock meant. I walked in and I looked around, and in just standing in the lobby and going like this, I saw more people of color than I had seen probably in my whole college career. And some things I didn't understand. And you'd be surprised at the basic assumptions that different cultures have. You just don't understand. And you stumble and you do stupid things and you learn amazing new things that you never knew about. It was fun.
Yeah.
It was very exciting, very challenging.
And again, as a reminder, that was in the late 60s.
1967.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of advice could you offer to those people who are just finishing their teacher training and are about to embark on a career as public educators?
You know, I used to encourage everybody that I thought had a talent. And now I have such mixed feelings. The first is just going to sound very cold. Find yourself an upwardly mobile blue-collar community and go to work there. Because there you will get more support as an educator than any place else, and you will have support from home, and you will have respect. Avoid, unless you're a specialist, if you have some really super whoopee specialist, avoid wealthy districts because you're trash. You're just peasant labor force. And you'll be treated very badly, and anything that goes wrong is your fault.
And this should be a 97 instead of a 95.
Yeah. It's very hard. If you're in an encouraging environment, there is no occupation better than being an educator. But so much of the workplace has changed.
How is it different today than it was when you began, Mike? I mean, there are obvious differences, but how did you see it?
Teachers were, and I'm not talking about my opinion, I'm talking about what people say. Teachers were almost like monks, and I don't mean anything sexual or religious. I mean they were giving up what they could have done, particularly if you were in certain fields like math and science at that time, where you could get a job anywhere. You were giving that up to work with kids. So you were considered to be doing something as a gift. You were giving up part of your life to help children. It was assumed. Sure, there were some people that they would say were bad, but that was a given. Parents thought of, first of all, the work parents, as opposed to aunts and grandparents and single parents and homes and foster. You had the backing. I mean, you called home and they wanted to know what they could do to help. Well, there are some who didn't, yes. Yeah, it was just wonderful. Yeah, it was just wonderful. Today, the kids have goals. I mean, play dates, and every kid is on some type of traveling team, and they have one activity, and they go all over. There are wonderful things about that, I'm sure. But the kid's life is like in a tunnel. It's just aimed over here. And anything that's going to knock that train off the track is evil and bad, and it can't. There are so many people that everything is somebody else's fault. Doing superintendent's hearings, once in a while you see, my son, daughter shouldn't have done that, and blah, 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 fine. And those kids, there's hope for. You work towards bringing them back. There are others, as soon as they walk in, it's the teacher's fault, it's the security guard's fault. The 1 pound of marijuana my kid had in 20 different bags was not his. And the schools don't have the support that they used to. And the homes, what was the old thing? To bring up a child, not the village, I hate the village.
Yeah.
It was a 3-legged stool. Yeah. All right, you had the family, you had the school, and you had the community, which included, it was sometimes called the church community. All right. Well, the family is hurting.
It's redefined, Mike.
And the church community, it's either very strong for some kids or non-existent for a lot of kids. It's a shame.
Is there anything that we wanted to talk about or that we haven't gotten to? Is there something that you want to mention before we wrap?
We've covered such a broad span. I think we've hit everything. I don't have any message to the future.
How about a generalization? The teachers in Brentwood are?
The teachers in Brentwood are probably, when I was there, I don't know the teachers today. I don't work with them except they to testify.
Fair. That's fair.
When I was there, they were the most dedicated, hardworking, child-centered. No, they weren't children. I always dealt with secondary kids, young people.
Yeah.
They were there. All of them, no, but the vast majority were working in conditions where they could have worked in much nicer conditions. They could have been paid a little bit better in some places. They didn't have to deal with all the secondary problems that kids were bringing to school. They were there, they stayed there, they didn't come in and leave and come in and leave. 42% of our kids turn over every year. And you have to find a way to work with a kid who appears in your class in January.
Drops in and drops
Right.
out and comes
They're
back.
all over the place. So I have never seen,
Remember when our staff turnover was very, very high?
Yeah.
Constantly leaving. But people, as you said, they stayed.
the ones that stayed forever.
Yes.
And the thing that I always used to say, and this just pretty much sums up my attitude to the teaching staff at Brentwood, you take all the teachers in any district you name, move them out, move in our teachers, and your school will improve. It will improve. We will have better everything.
Now, we've seen lots of changes from the time that you left and I left before you did, but we watched as the demographics and the district in terms of its clients that we were serving changed, and then changed again, and then changed again, to the point where you left or I left and then you left. Complete the phrase then, Brentwood students are.
Oh, I'm sorry, there is no Brentwood student. There are categories, there are groups. There are Brentwood students who are working so hard to overcome all kinds of adversity and will succeed and will go on and contribute tremendously. There are Brentwood students who aren't Brentwood students. They're there, they're not there, they move. There are actually circuits. You can get a map of Long Island, put pins in it, and you get two circles. One circles into the city and comes back out. One circles to the east end and comes back out. And it'll be 4 or 5 school districts that they bounce around. Brentwood has the best special ed program on Long Island. So for students with any type of handicapping condition, which is, it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful place to be. So we have everything from, we have kids with great backgrounds and they're going to college and everything's set and they're working fine. We have kids with terrible problems and things and they're struggling to get through, and we have kids we'd like to do something for. They're going to be there 6 weeks, they're going to be gone, and we have criminals. Do we have many of them? No. But we have some, and I'd love to get rid of them. So don't ask me about the Brentwood student. There isn't such a thing.
Mike, that's a
all
very,
these pieces.
very, very good, a very articulate and an honest answer to the question. And all that remains for me at this point is to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, for sharing yourself, for sharing your story, and for giving us the time so that we can record this for those who will come after us.
My pleasure.